Hello there, everyone. Here is a game from Maurice Ashley with the white pieces versus Grandmaster John P. Fedorowicz with the black pieces. This is from New York, 1994. Of course, Maurice was still an international master at the time, rated about 2460. And John Fedorowicz was Grandmaster, rated 2520 at the time. Maurice opened with C4 as he was playing around this time. And it's a very flexible system, of course, the English. And sometimes he would play a Botvinnik transposition with E4, just like as we see here. But then against certain systems, he would just go full out. And here, the game transposes into a classical King's Indian. So after these preliminary moves we see here, Fedorowicz decides to release the tension in his center by playing e takes d4, opting for a direct counterplay on the e file with rook e8, f3, solidifying the e4 pawn, knight h5. Now this position right here reminds me of a Maurice bind position in the Sicilian. The difference being that, of course, the c pawn would not be there, and you would have a structure like this. Nevertheless, when you have familiarity in various structures, they can help out in different openings. Knight c2, maintaining control over the d4 square. Okay. And also planning to move that knight to e3. Queen h4, knight d5 from Ashley, and that is attacking in a quite obvious way, of course, the c7 pawn. So knight a6, queen e1. So Ashley offers the end game immediately. Queen takes e1, rook takes e1. So black shouldn't have too much to worry about here in this endgame. Black's main disadvantage is a space disadvantage, but he has a beautiful pawn structure. Doesn't have too many weaknesses at all in the position, and he just has to complete his development and basically maintain the status quo, try to fight against white space advantage in that grip on d5, but this position can be considered as equal. c6, knight de3. So we can see with the move c6, a target has been created for Maurice to use at d6. So black has to be mindful of that. But as you can see, black has good piece development. It's bishops on g7, bishop on e6, and it's little problematic for for white to continue developing right now, especially on the queen side. So he has to be careful. Rook d1 for Maurice, targeting the d6 pawn. Rook a d8. The bishop drops back to f1. Knight into c5, and now rook b1, getting off of that diagonal that the dark square bishop is on g7, and in some cases threatening to play the move b4 to kick the knight off of c5. Again, it reminds me a lot of the Maurice bind setup. Knight a4, knight d4. Of course, Maurice would love to kick this knight out, but there's a problem with the knight coming into c3, forking both rooks. Knight d4, bishop drops back to c8, and now knight e2. Alright, so now Maurice guards the c3 square, and now he's prepared to play the move b3, ousting the knight on a4. f5, now there's b3, the knight hops in. Anyway, where else is that knight going to go? It'd be useful. Knight takes c3, b takes c3. And now here is good move from Maurice, and I felt that f5 was a mistake. I forgot to say that. Perhaps something just a little more quiet, maybe bishop e5, something here, something a little more solid. Maybe even a5. Okay, and you'll see why in a second. So b3 is played, knight c3. This is all good. bishop takes c3. Now Maurice gets to play e takes f5, and again create some more weaknesses in the black pawn structure. Remember, we mentioned d6 being a potential target, and now there's f5, and these things add up. Okay, knight c2 and f4. So this clamps white's position down a little bit and prevents white from using the e3 square with his bishop or knight. So right now it looks like, black has a nice clamp on the position. And again, white is statically better. If we just take like the pawn structure, white has a little advantage in that area. Right now his pieces are kind of discombobulated. However, if white can untangle his pieces, okay, and coordinate them and even trade off some pieces, then he will become better. So this lack of coordination from white is only a temporary disadvantage. Now it's hard for black to really capitalize, especially not having the queens on the board. But black must find a way to try to capitalize on this lack of coordination, because it is a temporary advantage that he possesses. Bishop a3, again targeting that d pawn. c5, okay, shuts out the bishop, but now the d5 square is very vulnerable now in black's camp. Bishop comes to c1, bishop e5, bishop comes out to the best diagonal that probably on the board. Well, actually, the dark square diagonal is the best one, but the second best one, the best one for light square bishops anyway. Knight g7, and that knight is on its way to f5, of course, to try to exploit these dark squares somehow. King f2, knight f5, bishop b2. Again, this is the best policy for white, is to try to trade down and go into get rid of as much dynamic factors as possible and go right into a ending where you're better. Knight e1, and we can see this ambitious approach by black, but to me it seems over ambitious. Okay, all it is, that pawn storm would be great if there was like a real attack going, but I see that black is just trying to cripple the majority on the king side that white has. But we'll see. Maurice does a good job in dealing with this approach. So knight d3. So now the bishop on e5 is traded off. What a mighty piece lost in the battle for black. Knight takes b2. Knight d4. So that is very strong. Knight a4. b6. Knight c3, bishop e6, and rook e1. And we can see now that Maurice has done a good job consolidating his pieces, trading off. And now we see black is left with these static weaknesses. However, all is not lost. So now, rook g8. This gives an opportunity for Maurice now to trade some more, because now that the rook is on g8, Maurice plays bishop d5. Now the bishop can't really move anywhere because the bishop would be the rook would be captured on g8. h3, and here's a good move coming up right here. g4. Now of course, g takes h3 could have been played, but doubling up the pawns, it might have been problematic for white to really advance those pawns. I like what Maurice did. He keeps the pawns healthy and together. This pawn on h3 will prove to be weak. Rook g8, rook ge8, and now rook h1, threatening to pick up the pawn. Rook e1, rook h8, knight e4 check, and now he trades the bishop off. So gets rid of one of the defenders of h3, and now knight takes e6. g4. So here we can say white is better. White has consolidated, and now black is left with these static weaknesses. This pawn at h3 that is definitely going to fall, and this pawn on d6. So you can see what happens that when you take risk early in the game, sometimes it pays off if you're black. Like this game could have very well been a short miniature. However, Maurice was able to weather the little storm positionally the awkwardness that black had placed on the position, and now we can see how it worked out. White has clear past pawn on the G and clear past pawns on the F and G files, and black has these terrible weaknesses in his position. King G3. Now knight D4. So again, powerful post for the knight. Pawns just start moseying on up. So black, the question is, how are you going to stop him? Rook HD8. And of course you have these ideas now creeping up in the position, like knight to F4. Excuse me, F5, where the pin of the rook forces white to have to move his king. So knight G5 happens. King D7. And now rook takes H3. So the pawn just drops unceremoniously. So all of that aggressiveness did not work out. A5. This move basically had nothing to do with anything. It's kind of like a lost, losing it basically when you lose the thread of the position. There's no real, it's just a move basically. No explanation required. Now here, Maurice missed a chance for a really nice move. And let me just preface it by saying that this is like black's cornerstone right here. And I know some of you are out there yelling, oh, give up the exchange. No, he could have just simply played his knight to F3. And I'm sure Maurice saw this during the game because it's an obvious idea, right? You want to get rid of that, get that knight out of there, risk doubling, black's pawns, but and then if the knight moves, you can put more pressure on this. You have all kind of themes, just checking here perhaps. However, Maurice probably looked at this variation and saw this. Knight F5 check, King F2, and then rook takes G4 and was like, hey, I don't want to, I'm not going to drop the pawn like that. However, white has a beautiful rejoinder, which is just simply knight E5 check, forking the rook on G4 and the king on D7, and of course winning immediately. So all black could do in this instance after king F2 is play knight E7, and then he will roll on with the pawns, of course, and black is busted in this position. Okay, so he just kicked the knight out, right? The knight was glorious here, and now it's inglorious and infamous here. And he could have played that move there, but he played another good move. Not a glorious move, but just a good strong move. Rook H7 check, and only God knows what the time situation was. So guys are in time trouble, stuff like that. So we don't know. King C6. Now Maurice plays a fantastic move here. He plays rook takes D4, just getting rid of the cornerstone in Fedorovic's position. Then plays knight E6, threatening mate right here with the rook. And for those of you who are into such things, I think it's this kind of mate is called Anastasia's mate. I believe it's called Anastasia's mate. So he's threatening Anastasia's mate on C7. He's also threatening a rook, and he's threatening the pawn. The rook goes to C8, stops Anastasia's mate, but knight takes D4, so another pawn drops. King C5. Knight comes to E6, King B4, and now the pawns are rolling on to glory. F5. King A3. The rook drops back. Knight D4 from Maurice. He gets distracted a little bit here. He could have just kept marching the pawn. He could have played just F6 here and been good. He gets distracted a little bit by the counterplay of Fedorowicz here. So King B4, King F4, and now he gets back on track. Check. King takes B3. Knight takes D6. Rook C D8. And of course, he's playing very natural moves because Normally, you want to make sure that there is no counterplay whatsoever from your opponent, and then go on with your plans. Although sometimes you can just immediately go on with your plans anyway. Knight e4 check. Rook takes b6, and this is what I'm talking about. Maurice makes sure all of the pawns are eliminated, so there's no winning chances of no swindles available for Fedorowicz. He knows that these pawns will win, and now he's ready to start marching. Rook e6, king c7, g5, rook e1, rook e7, check, king c6, f7, and Fedorowicz resigned. Good game by Maurice Ashley, international master at the time. Maurice Ashley against the established New York Grandmaster in John P. Fedorowicz, affectionately known as Rocky. So I hope you enjoyed that. And I'll be showing some more Ashley games against Grandmasters. Also, please like, subscribe, comment, and also check the links below. I always have links on the different openings that are being discussed in the videos. So I'll see you guys soon on the next one.